What if everything you believe about yourself, your dreams, your fears, your values, even the voice inside your head, was not truly yours? What if, long before you could even speak, the foundation of your mind was already being built, brick, by forces you did not choose? Imagine walking through life inside a cage so vast and invisible that you mistake it for freedom. A cage that doesn't confine your body, but your thoughts, and the most unsettling truth. Most people never realize it's there. We grow up believing we are individuals, making independent choices. We say we love certain foods, we support certain causes, we admire certain people, we chase certain dreams. But pause for a moment. Where did those desires come from? Were they born in you, or were they planted? From the moment we entered the world, our minds became a battlefield of influence. Parents, teachers, media, religion, culture, all competing to script the story of who we are. We absorbed it all, unfiltered, before we even had the chance to question. As children, we were open circuits. Every word spoken, every rule enforced, every smile rewarded, or tear punished, left an imprint deeper than we understood. Praise shaped what we chased. Shame shaped what we hid. Rules shaped what we believed to be good or bad. Slowly, our minds learned to obey patterns. We believed we were learning truth, but often, we were simply being conditioned. The invisible cage of thought is not built overnight. It is constructed layer by layer, until one day you wake up as an adult thinking you are free. But in reality, you are still carrying scripts written for you years ago. Your identity, your values, your fears, even your ambitions. How much of them did you truly choose? Consider how quickly children adopt the culture of the home they're born into. A child raised in one part of the world may grow up believing loyalty to their nation is sacred, while a child across the border grows up believing the same about theirs. Both are convinced they are right, yet both were simply programmed by accident. Of birth, religion, politics, morality, all feel like deeply personal convictions. But beneath the surface, they are echoes of the environment we absorbed before we had the ability to resist. This isn't an abstract metaphor. It is a psychological fact. Human beings are designed to learn through imitation and reinforcement. As infants, we imitate sounds. As children, we imitate behaviors. As students, we imitate authority. At every stage, the structure of our minds is sculpted, not by choice, but by conditioning. And once these patterns take root, they shape our perception of reality itself. What we think is normal, what we think is true, what we think is possible. This is the invisible cage. Not bars around the body, but boundaries around the imagination. It is the reason most people never question the systems they live under. It is why propaganda works, why authority is obeyed, and why conformity feels natural. The cage does not need guards if the prisoners never try to escape. The unsettling part is this: the cage was built so early that by the time you were old enough to notice, it already felt like home. You learned to defend it, to justify it, even to fight for it. In truth, you were not simply raised, you were programmed, and the deeper you look, the more disturbing the question becomes. If your thoughts, your values, and your desires were planted long ago, then who are you really? The journey to answer that question begins here. Childhood is often remembered as a time of innocence, of play, of unshaped potential. But beneath the surface, it is also the most vulnerable stage of human existence, the stage where the deepest programming takes place. From the moment we open our eyes, the world begins to write on us. Every word we hear, every gesture we observe, every reaction from the adults around us becomes an instruction, silently scripting the mind we will one day call our own. Philosophers once described the child as a tabula rasa, blank slate, and in many ways, this metaphor remains powerful. A newborn does not yet know what is right or wrong, true or false, sacred or forbidden. The slate is empty, but it does not stay empty for long. Parents, teachers, and authority figures begin writing on it immediately, not through conscious choice, but through repetition, reward, and punishment. Without even realizing it, they become the first programmers of the human mind. The child does not resist. By design, the young brain is not built to question it, is built to absorb. Evolution ensured this. For survival, children needed to learn quickly, to accept the tribe's rules without hesitation. Skepticism would have been a liability, and so, the infant mind became a sponge, soaking up whatever was given, without filter, without judgment. Language, beliefs, customs, and morality all flow in seamlessly, and all feel as though they are simply the way reality works. Consider the lessons hidden in the smallest interactions. A child reaches for a cookie before dinner and is scolded instantly, learning that some desires must be suppressed. Another child draws praise for being well behaved at school, quietly absorbing that approval comes not from authenticity, but from obedience. Even before formal education begins, the emotional circuitry of reward and punishment is already being shaped, teaching what will be sought and what will be feared. Then comes school, often thought of as a neutral place of learning, but in reality, it is something far more powerful, a factory of belief. Classrooms do not simply transmit knowledge, they transmit structure. Bells regulate time, grades regulate self-worth, teachers symbolize authority, rules symbolize obedience. In subtle and not so subtle ways, the child learns that value comes from performance, that truth comes from authority, and that survival comes from conformity. The tools are simple yet devastatingly effective. Praise reinforces compliance. Detention punishes rebellion. Gold stars and report cards tie the child's sense of self to external approval. Over time, these mechanisms instill dependency, shaping individuals who seek validation not from within, but from outside themselves. The habit of obedience, once established in school, rarely disappears. It mutates into obedience to employers, obedience to social norms, obedience to systems of power that were never chosen, only inherited. And yet, schools are only one part of the machinery. Beyond classrooms, children are bathed in myths, stories, and cultural rituals that seep into the subconscious. Fairy tales teach morality before a child can articulate philosophy. Stories of heroes and villains sketch the outlines of good and evil, embedding emotional associations that endure for life. Holidays, traditions, and religious rituals add further layers, weaving identity into the very fabric of belonging. To be part of the group, the child must accept the group's story. To reject it would mean isolation, and isolation, for a child, feels like death. This is how belief takes root. Not as a conscious choice, but as a survival mechanism. We do not choose to believe in the stories we were told as children, we inherit them. They sink so deeply that they appear indistinguishable from truth itself. A child raised in one culture believes their customs are sacred. A child raised in another believes the opposite. Both grow up certain they are right, but neither ever had the freedom to choose their foundation. What is most haunting is that these early imprints rarely fade. Neuroscience confirms that childhood experiences carve lasting pathways in the brain. Habits of thought become grooves, and the grooves become ruts, shaping not just how we think, but what we are capable of thinking. Even as adults, when we pride ourselves on independence and reason, much of our thought process is still being guided by patterns set decades earlier. In the playground, the classroom, and the family home, this is the hidden architecture of identity, the beliefs that drive our decisions, the fears that limit our actions, the dreams that feel uniquely ours. Many of them were chosen for us before we could understand what choice even was. We were trained to see the world a certain way, to desire certain outcomes, to fear certain possibilities, and to accept certain limitations. We were told, this is who you are. This is how things work, this is what matters, and we obeyed, Not because we understood, but because we had no alternative. And so the factory of belief continues its work silently. It does not need chains to control us. It needs only stories, approval, and repetition. By the time we reach adulthood, the programming is so complete that we mistake it for our own voice. We defend it fiercely, we argue for it passionately, and we fight for it loyally, ever realizing it was handed to us long before we could resist. The question lingers, unsettling in its simplicity. Did you ever truly choose what you believe, or was it chosen for you? Childhood conditioning may begin at home and in schools, but it never ends there. As we grow, the walls of influence expand. The family is just the first circle, the classroom the second. Beyond them lies the vast and invisible empire of mass culture, the media, entertainment, advertising, and political messaging that together act as the hidden architects of modern consciousness. It is here that programming becomes seamless, so woven into daily life that it ceases to feel like programming at all. Every story we hear, every image we consume, every advertisement that flashes in the corner of our vision carries an instruction. Some are obvious by this, believe that, follow here, avoid there. But most are subtle, unspoken, operating beneath awareness. They do not tell us what to think directly. They tell us what is normal to think, what is safe to think, what everyone else is already thinking, and so, without noticing, we adjust, we absorb, we conform. The 20th century gave us some of the clearest demonstrations of this hidden machinery. Figures like Edward Bernays, often called the father of public relations, understood that democracy could be managed not by controlling votes directly, but by controlling desire itself. His methods were simple but radical: link products and policies to emotions, symbols, and unconscious drives. When he convinced women in the 1920s to take up cigarettes by branding them as torches of freedom, it wasn't about selling tobacco, it was about selling identity, liberation, and the illusion of choice. Bernays did not just advertise products, he advertised ways of being. Governments quickly recognized the same tools could be weaponized. Propaganda during the world wars was not merely information, it was psychological conditioning on a mass scale. Posters, films, and speeches created archetypes of the noble soldier, the evil enemy, the virtuous homeland. These images bypassed reason and went straight for the emotional core, uniting millions under shared myths. Once planted, these myths were self-sustaining. Citizens defended them, spread them, lived by them, never realizing they were crafted in strategy rooms by invisible hands. And yet, propaganda did not end with war. It evolved into advertising, into television, into the 24-hour news cycle. What began as overt national messaging morphed into a subtler form of cultural engineering. Cartoons reinforced gender roles. Sitcoms normalized family structures. Commercials linked self-worth to consumption. News networks framed what was urgent and what was irrelevant. Through endless repetition, society was trained to see certain lifestyles as aspirational, certain ideas as unquestionable, and certain questions as unthinkable. This is the genius of the hidden architects. They rarely tell you what you must believe. Instead, they create an atmosphere where certain beliefs feel natural and others feel insane. They shape the boundaries of the possible, narrowing the imagination so that obedience does not feel like obedience. It feels like common sense. Consider how entertainment itself functions as programming. The blockbuster film is not just a cultural ritual. Heroes embody national ideals. Villains embody foreign threats. Happy endings embody the promise of justice. Even when we watch for fun, we are absorbing templates for how to feel, how to desire, how to interpret the world. The rise of celebrity culture amplifies this effect, offering idols who embody manufactured versions of success and beauty, conditioning entire generations to measure themselves against illusions. But if the 20th century perfected mass conditioning, The 21st has refined it to a terrifying degree. Algorithms now do what propaganda departments once dreamed of: individualized influence, targeted down to the person. Social media platforms learn our habits, track our attention, and feed us endless streams of reinforcement. The meme, the viral video, the trending outrage, these are the new tools of programming. They do not just reflect culture, they manufacture it in real time. Think of how a platform like TikTok can turn a random phrase, dance, or idea into a global obsession in days. Think of how outrage cycles can push millions into the same emotional state at once. These are not accidents, they are the predictable outcomes of systems designed to capture and hold human attention. And when attention is captured, thought follows. What we see repeatedly, we normalize. What we are denied, we forget. Meanwhile, political manipulation has adapted seamlessly to this environment. Campaigns no longer rely only on speeches or posters. They rely on data, micro-targeting, and emotional profiling. Each voter is fed a curated narrative designed to push their specific psychological buttons. Fear, hope, anger, belonging, all are leveraged, not to inform citizens, but to program them. The illusion of choice remains, but the menu of options has already been engineered. The unsettling truth is that much of what we call culture is not an organic expression of people's values, but the product of deliberate construction. We are told what to desire through commercials. We are told what to fear through news cycles. We are told what to laugh at through sitcoms. And slowly, imperceptibly, we learn to police ourselves. We dismiss alternative ideas as unrealistic. We mock those who step outside the narrative. We enforce the programming on each other, believing we are defending truth, when in fact we are defending a system designed by unseen architects. This is why propaganda is so powerful. It does not need to persuade everyone. It only needs to create an environment where questioning it feels abnormal. Once that happens, most people will conform, not out of fear, but out of comfort. They will censor themselves, conform willingly, and even feel pride in their conformity. It is easy to look back on history and see propaganda in its obvious forms: the posters of wartime, the speeches of dictators, the blatant censorship of authoritarian regimes. But the more dangerous programming is not obvious. It is the normalization of consumption, the worship of entertainment, the constant distraction that keeps us from noticing. It is not the iron fist, but the velvet glove, the programming that feels like pleasure, that feels like freedom, that feels like who we are. And so we must ask, how much of the culture we live in is truly ours, and how much was designed? When you repeat a slogan, desire a product, cheer for a celebrity, or rage at the latest controversy, whose voice are you echoing? Where did that thought begin? With you or with the architects of influence who have been shaping your reality since before you could name it? The cage of childhood may have built the foundation, but it is media, propaganda, and power that decorate the walls and lock the door. If the hidden architects are the engineers of programming, psychology is their blueprint. To understand how control works, we must understand the frightening predictability of human behavior. What seems like free will often dissolves under the weight of authority, repetition, and social pressure. Perhaps the most infamous demonstration of this came in the early 1960s, when psychologist Stanley Milgram conducted his now legendary obedience experiment. Volunteers were told they were helping with a study on memory. They were instructed to deliver electric shocks to another participant whenever they answered questions incorrectly. The shocks, they were told, would become increasingly painful with each mistake. What the volunteers didn't know was that the victim was an actor. The shocks were fake, and the true subject of the experiment was not memory, it was obedience. As the dial turned higher, the actor screamed, begged, even fell silent, as if unconscious. Many volunteers hesitated, some protested. Yet when the man in the white lab coat calmly insisted, "The experiment requires that you continue," the majority obeyed. Roughly 2/3 went all the way to the maximum voltage, believing they were inflicting lethal harm on an innocent person simply because an authority figure told them to. The lesson was devastating. Ordinary people, not sadists or psychopaths, could be compelled to commit horrifying acts when instructed by authority. Obedience was not the exception, it was the rule. A decade later, Philip Zimbardo's Stanford prison experiment drove the point even deeper. Volunteers were divided randomly into guards and prisoners in a mock prison. Within days, guards became abusive, prisoners submissive, and the situation spiraled so far out of control it had to be stopped prematurely. The experiment revealed how quickly roles, uniforms, and power dynamics could override conscience. Good people did not resist the roles imposed on them, they became them. These experiments are not isolated curiosities of history, they are windows into the mechanics of programming itself. Authority, social roles, and group pressure exploit vulnerabilities built into the human psyche. We are not neutral, rational agents drifting freely through the world. We are deeply impressionable, wired to conform, eager to belong, desperate to obey when faced with structures of power. Psychologists have long studied the mechanisms that make this possible. Operant conditioning, for instance, is one of the simplest, yet most effective. Rewards and punishments, even subtle ones, shape behavior over time. In childhood, it may look like gold stars, praise, or detention slips. In adulthood, it becomes salaries, promotions, social approval, the silent withdrawal of all three. Slowly, we learn what brings pleasure and what brings pain, until compliance feels natural and rebellion feels dangerous. Another mechanism is social proof. Humans are social creatures, and we rely heavily on cues from others to determine what is real, what is acceptable, and what is safe. If enough people laugh at a joke, we assume it's funny. If enough people support a policy, we assume it's right. This mechanism is so powerful that entire propaganda systems operate on it. Once an idea gains the appearance of majority support through polls, headlines, or staged rallies, individuals fall in line. Not because the idea is true, but because they fear standing alone against the crowd. Then there is learned helplessness, a phenomenon uncovered by psychologist Martin Seligman in his experiments. Dogs subjected to inescapable shocks eventually stopped trying to escape even when the possibility of freedom was introduced. They had internalized the belief that resistance was futile. The same dynamic occurs in human beings trapped in systems of debt, bureaucracy, or authoritarian control. When escape seems impossible long enough, people stop trying altogether. They comply, not because they agree, but because they no longer believe resistance matters. Confirmation bias plays its role too. Once we accept an idea, we instinctively seek out evidence that supports it and reject evidence that challenges it. This bias makes programming self-reinforcing. Feed people a narrative long enough, and they will construct their own arguments to defend it. They will police themselves, protect the system that manipulates them, and even ridicule anyone who dares to question it. Together, these psychological mechanisms form the scaffolding of control. They explain why propaganda sticks, why authority is obeyed, why myths endure, and perhaps most unsettling of all, they reveal that programming does not always feel like programming. It feels like agreement. It feels like belonging. It feels like truth. Consider how these forces play out in daily life. At work, we obey managers, not because every instruction makes sense, but because authority compels obedience. In politics, we often side with the majority, not after careful analysis, but because social proof convinces us that dissent is dangerous. In culture, we adopt values that align with the people around us, not necessarily because we believe them deeply, but because we crave acceptance. And when life feels overwhelming, we retreat into resignation, convincing ourselves that nothing can change, a quiet echo of learned helplessness. The programming works because it does not need to be perfect. It only needs to align with what human psychology already inclines us toward: obedience, conformity, approval, survival. The invisible cage is reinforced not by force alone, but by the invisible chains of our own instincts. When we see history's darkest chapters, the atrocities carried out by ordinary citizens, the blind loyalty to destructive leaders, the silence of masses in the face of injustice, it is tempting to believe those people were uniquely cruel or foolish. But Milgram and Zimbardo remind us of a far more uncomfortable truth. They were not unique. They were human, and under the right conditions, we would likely have done the same. This is why programming works. It does not need to break us. It only needs to lean on the psychology that already governs us. Authority, repetition, group pressure, reward, punishment, and fear, these are the levers. Once pulled, they bend human will with terrifying efficiency. And so, the real question is not whether programming exists. The question is whether we are strong enough to recognize it in ourselves, and whether we dare to resist what our very psychology compels us to obey. If childhood gave us the grammar of belief, and society provided the rules of obedience, then religion and morality provided the invisible script, the inner voice that tells us what we should and should not be. Unlike school grades or state laws, religion does not need an external enforcer. Its brilliance and its danger lies in the way it implants the enforcer within, from an early age. Many are told of a divine presence, watching their every move, recording every thought, weighing every intention. A child learns not only to fear punishment from parents or teachers, but eternal punishment from something far larger, something cosmic. Heaven and hell are not just metaphors, they are the ultimate carrot and stick, rewards and punishments, stretched beyond the span of life itself. This is how religion becomes one of the most powerful psychological programs. It does not rely on visible force. It relies on self-policing. Guilt, shame, sin, these are not punishments imposed from the outside. They are emotions cultivated from within, guiding behavior, even when no one is watching. The priest, the imam, the rabbi, the monk may introduce the doctrine, but once internalized, the believer becomes both prisoner and guard. Consider how powerful this mechanism truly is. Political regimes require armies, propaganda machines, surveillance states. Religion requires only belief. Once a person believes their inner thoughts are monitored by an omnipotent being, compliance is total. Even rebellion becomes dangerous, if one fears it, in the privacy of their mind. But this is not merely about organized religion. Moral codes, secular or spiritual, function the same way. Society praises altruism, condemns selfishness, honors loyalty, shames betrayal. These codes are not neutral. They are shaped by history, by cultural needs, by those in power. What one culture calls virtue, another may call vice. Yet for the individual raised within a moral system, these values feel absolute, unquestionable, almost natural. The philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche warned that morality itself was often a form of control. He argued that concepts like good and evil were not objective truths, but inventions, tools of the weak to bind the strong, or of the powerful to domesticate the masses. In his view, morality was not about eternal truth, but about programming, imposing values to regulate behavior. Sigmund Freud, from another angle, described the superego, the internalized authority figure within the psyche. The superego, he said, develops as children absorb the commands and prohibitions of parents and culture. It becomes the voice in one's head that criticizes, judges, and enforces rules long after the external authority is gone. To Freud, morality was not divine, it was psychological conditioning, dressed in sacred language, and modern neuroscience complicates the story even further. Studies suggest that decisions we believe we make consciously are often initiated unconsciously before we become aware of them. Brain scans reveal activity predicting a choice seconds before the subject reports having made it. If true, this challenges the very foundation of free will. What we call a choice may simply be the outcome of hidden processes, shaped by genetics, childhood conditioning, and environmental cues. This raises a haunting question. If our desires, fears, and moral judgments were programmed long before we became aware of them, then who are we really? When you choose honesty over deceit, kindness over cruelty, is that truly you choosing, or the echo of your upbringing, your religion, your cultural myths playing out through you? Even rebellion may not be as free as it seems. The atheist rejecting religion, the dissident rejecting authority, the revolutionary rejecting morality may still be reacting to the very systems they oppose. The programming runs so deep that even resistance is shaped by it. Nietzsche captured this paradox when he spoke of the death of God, not as liberation, but as a crisis. For when the old structures collapse, we find ourselves unmoored, forced to confront the terrifying possibility that there is no inherent meaning, no eternal law, no foundation beneath our feet. And yet, the illusion of free will is not easily discarded. Human beings live as if they are free. We act, we decide, we deliberate, even if beneath the surface, those actions are predictable outputs of earlier inputs. Perhaps the illusion itself is necessary, a psychological survival mechanism. To believe that every thought and action is predetermined would be paralyzing. We require the story of freedom in order to live. Religion, morality, and the myth of free will may therefore be seen as the deepest layer of programming, not because they limit us externally, but because they define who we believe we are internally. They do not tell us simply what to do. They tell us what kind of person we must become. And once that identity is fixed, deviation feels not just wrong but unthinkable. The cage is no longer outside us. It is inside us, written into the very language of conscience, etched into the neural patterns of the brain. We patrol its boundaries ourselves, mistaking its walls for the horizon of reality. So when we speak of freedom, we must ask, freedom from what? From external authority, from cultural conditioning, from morality itself, or from the illusion that we were ever free to begin with. For centuries, the architects of belief relied on pulpits, schools, and mass media to shape human consciousness. But today, a new teacher has taken their place, one far more subtle, far more intimate, and far more powerful. The teacher is not a priest or professor. It is not even a person at all. It is the algorithm, unlike propaganda of the past, which was cast broadly upon populations. Today's influence is personalized, tailored, and invisible. Social media platforms are not simply windows into the world. They are mirrors that adjust themselves in real time, reflecting back not reality, but a version of reality most likely to capture your attention and hold it. Every like, every scroll, every pause of your thumb on the screen is a data point. And with each data point, the algorithm learning not who you are, but how to keep you watching, clicking, buying, believing. This is not programming in the metaphorical sense. It is literal conditioning. Dopamine loops small bursts of pleasure when a notification appears, when someone reacts to a post, when a video aligns with your biases. Train the brain in the same way a slot machine conditions a gambler. You think you are choosing to engage. In truth, you are being trained to return. The brilliance of this system lies in its invisibility. No one forces you to open an app. No police officer drags you into the feed. You open it willingly, eagerly, sometimes unconsciously. The algorithm has turned manipulation into desire. Consider the phenomenon of echo chambers. In traditional propaganda, the challenge was ensuring that dissenting voices did not disrupt the narrative. But online, algorithms solve this problem automatically. They prioritize content that confirms your existing worldview and suppress content that challenges it, not out of malice, but because agreement keeps you engaged. Over time, You are surrounded by digital walls, so subtle you cannot see them. The world begins to look exactly as you already believe it to be. And those who think differently, they seem not just wrong, but alien, incomprehensible, even dangerous. Political manipulation thrives in this environment. Where once governments broadcast slogans and posters, they now whisper directly into individual feeds, tailoring messages to personality profiles. Micro-targeted advertising ensures that no two citizens experience the same political reality. One voter is shown fear, another hope, another outrage, all calibrated to push each person's psychological buttons. In such a system, democracy becomes less about shared debate and more about private manipulation, invisible and untraceable. And this manipulation does not end with politics. Every advertisement you see has been chosen not because it represents what exists in the marketplace, but because it reflects what the algorithm predicts will tempt you most. Consumption itself becomes programmed, your desires sculpted by patterns you did not consciously choose. What clothes you wear, what music you stream, what vacations you dream of, all may be less the result of inner preference than of predictive modeling. Yet the influence runs deeper still. Social media has birthed the phenomenon of relationships, one-sided bonds with influencers, celebrities, and online personalities who become companions in the mind of the viewer. For the algorithm, these figures are not mere entertainers. They are psychological anchors, keeping you emotionally tethered to platforms. You feel as if you know them, as if they are speaking directly to you. But in truth, they are part of the architecture, a living extension of the feed's design. What makes this programming even more disturbing is its scale. Childhood conditioning once laid the foundation of identity. Schools and religions reinforced it. Mass media shaped it. But today's digital ecosystem ensures that the programming never stops. From the moment you wake to the moment you fall asleep, your mind is immersed in a personalized stream of influence, so constant that it becomes indistinguishable from your own thoughts. And here lies the most unsettling question: how much of your personality is truly yours? When you laugh at a meme, adopt a political stance, feel desire for a product, or outrage at a headline dead, you arrive at that response freely. Or was it served to you, cultivated by invisible calculations that know you better than you know yourself? Modern neuroscience suggests that human beings are not as unpredictable as we like to imagine. Algorithms exploit this predictability. By analyzing millions of data points, they can forecast behavior with startling accuracy. Your clicks today predict your preferences tomorrow. Your emotional state can be nudged, your fears amplified, your joys prolonged or extinguished. This precision makes historical propaganda look crude by comparison. Where governments once tried to sway entire populations with a single speech, algorithms now sculpt each individual reality. Where advertising once targeted broad demographics, housewives, teenagers, businessmen, it now tailors messages to the unique psychological profile of one person. The eerie brilliance is that no one appears to be in control. Politicians, corporations, influencers, all are themselves participants, feeding the system content. But the algorithm, indifferent and unseen, decides what thrives and what disappears. Power shifts from the creators of messages to the silent architect that distributes them. In this way, the algorithm has become the new teacher of the human mind. But unlike traditional teachers, it does not educate with intention or care for truth. It optimizes only for engagement. Truth, falsity, wisdom, or deception makes no distinction. What matters is whether you remain hooked. And so the algorithm teaches not how to think critically, but how to crave, how to react, how to depend on its endless feed of stimulation. The consequences are profound. Social cohesion fractures as each individual inhabits a private informational universe. Shared reality dissolves. People lose not only the ability to understand one another, but even to imagine that another perspective could exist. Polarization is not a side effect, it is the inevitable outcome of a system that thrives on division, because outrage keeps people clicking longer than agreement ever could. The question becomes, where does this leave us? If childhood was the first programming, and religion the second, then algorithms are the third on ongoing, lifelong programming that adapts and evolves with us. The cage has grown intelligent. It no longer simply contains us. It learns from us, reshaping itself in response to our every move. What once was external programming has now become a feedback loop, where human thought and digital influence blur into one. You teach the algorithm who you are, and in return, it teaches you who to become. In this light, the age-old debate about free will grows more urgent. Are you choosing what to think, or are you thinking what the algorithm chose for you? The frightening truth is that the line between human identity and machine influence is dissolving. We no longer live merely in societies shaped by propaganda. We live inside digital ecosystems that shape us at every moment, rewriting our thoughts as quickly as we can think them. The algorithm is not simply a tool. It is a mirror, a teacher, and perhaps a new kind of ruler, one we never elected, one we never questioned, and one whose lessons we carry in our minds without even knowing we have been taught. If the story ended here with childhood conditioning, religious frameworks, propaganda, and algorithms, then human beings would appear little more than puppets, their strings pulled by unseen hands. But history has always contained rebels, skeptics, and visionaries who sensed the invisible scripts and dared to rewrite them. The question is not whether programming exists. It does. The question is whether we can awaken within it, see it clearly, and begin to author ourselves. The first step is recognition. Most people never question the foundations of their thoughts, never pause to ask, why do I believe what I believe? They assume their opinions are authentic, their desires natural, their choices free. But once you glimpse the machinery behind the curtain, the family imprints, cultural myths, media illusions, psychological triggers, and algorithmic manipulations, you cannot unsee it. Awareness cracks the shell of certainty, and though uncomfortable, this discomfort is the beginning of liberation. Carl Jung wrote of the shadow, the repressed, hidden aspects of ourselves we refuse to acknowledge. To confront the shadow is to shine light on the unconscious patterns driving our lives. Society, too, has its shadow, the collective programming we inherit without question. Awakening means daring to look into both shadows, personal and collective, and admitting how much of what we call identity is simply repetition of someone else's design. This act of radical honesty is painful. It threatens the ego's comfort, but without it, freedom is impossible. Mindfulness provides another entry point. In a world engineered for distraction, the simple act of observing thoughts without immediately identifying with them is revolutionary. When a thought arises, desire, fear, outrage, you can ask, is this mine, or is it a residue of programming? To pause is to reclaim choice. To witness without reacting is to loosen the grip of conditioning. Slowly, mindfulness exposes the illusion that we are slaves to the first impulse, and it reveals the possibility of responding rather than merely reacting. Philosophy of skepticism deepens this path. From Socrates to Nietzsche, the wisest thinkers have urged us to question everything, including our own convictions. Skepticism does not mean cynicism. It means refusing to bow before unexamined beliefs. When confronted with absolute certainty, skepticism asks, who benefits from me believing this? When offered identity labels, it asks, do these define me, or do they confine me? In this way, philosophy becomes not an abstract discipline, but a weapon against manipulation, a way of sharpening the mind until it cuts through illusion. Modern neuroscience adds an encouraging truth. The brain is plastic, neural pathways forged in childhood or reinforced by culture are not unchangeable prisons. Through effort, practice, and repetition, we can rewire ourselves. New habits of thought, new disciplines of reflection, even new environments can literally reshape the brain's architecture. The program is not a cage of steel. It is more like clay-hardened, but still capable of being reshaped with patience and courage. Yet none of this is easy. To break the program requires discomfort. It means confronting cherished illusions, dismantling comforting narratives, and enduring the anxiety of not knowing. It means recognizing how much of one's life has been lived unconsciously, and then choosing not to remain asleep. This choice demands courage, because the alternative, obedience, conformity, passive scrolling, will always feel easier. The program offers the comfort of belonging, of certainty, of being carried by the crowd. To step outside it is to risk alienation, but it is also to reclaim authenticity. Self-authoring begins when you accept responsibility for your own narrative. It means no longer outsourcing your identity to institutions, ideologies, or algorithms. Instead, you become the writer of your story. This does not imply total independence. No human being is free from influence, but it means conscious influence. You choose the books you read, the voices you listen to, the practices you cultivate. You become intentional about shaping the clay of your mind, rather than letting it be sculpted by invisible hands. Jung's shadow work, mindfulness, skepticism, and neuroplasticity are tools, but tools are useless without action. Breaking the program is not a single moment of enlightenment, but an ongoing process, a daily commitment to awareness. It is catching yourself before reacting, questioning before believing, reflecting before consuming. It is creating spaces of silence in a world addicted to noise, spaces where your authentic voice can emerge without being drowned out by the feed. And what emerges in this silence, not the absence of programming, but the presence of possibility. For the first time, you glimpse that your thoughts do not have to be predetermined, that your morality can be chosen, that your values can be authored deliberately rather than inherited blindly. Freedom is not the absence of influence, it is the conscious selection of influence. Imagine humanity if even a fraction of people undertook this path. Propaganda would falter, for manipulation relies on the unconscious. Algorithms would lose some of their power, for they rely on automatic reaction. Religious and political institutions would face new accountability, for their followers would no longer accept inherited truths without question. The collective shadow would be illuminated, and society would move closer to maturity. But perhaps, the most profound change would be internal. For to awaken is not simply to resist control. It is to experience a deeper kind of aliveness. When you break even partially from the program, you feel the weight of imposed identities fall away. You realize that uncertainty, once feared, is actually freedom. You discover that discomfort, once avoided, is the crucible of growth. And you see that the self, far from being a fixed construct, is a living story, one that can be rewritten. Endlessly, no one can promise a final escape from programming. To be human is to be influenced. But there is a vast difference between living unconsciously inside the script and consciously rewriting it as you go. The first is imprisonment. The second is authorship. The path is not utopian. It does not end with a perfectly free individual, untouched by influence. It ends with a person who sees, who questions, who chooses, and that is enough. For the first step to freedom is not to destroy the program, but to recognize it. The moment you see it, truly see it, you are no longer fully inside its grasp. Awareness cracks the cage, and through that crack, light begins to enter. The challenge, then, is offered to you. Will you continue to scroll, consume, obey content, to let the script write you? Or will you pause, reflect, and take up the pen yourself? The answer will not be given by your upbringing, your culture, or the algorithm. It will be written in the choices you make from this moment forward. The program is powerful, but so too is the human capacity to awaken. And in the end, history will not be written by those who sleepwalked, through their lives, but by those who had the courage to wake up and write themselves into being.